To summarize, I can just tell you like this. If it's a measure of emotion, libertarians are probably the lowest of the three groups. If it's a measure of reasoning, rationality, they're the highest. There's one exception. There's only one emotion that we have measured on which libertarians are higher. It's one called reactance. Items on the scale are things such as, I find contradicting others stimulating. It makes me angry when another person is held up as a model for me to follow. And this is my favorite. When something is prohibited, I usually think that's exactly what I'm going to do. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here at Cato. I've never been here before, but I've been reading and learning about libertarians for a long time. I study the moral foundations of politics. My jumping off point for the talk today, let's see, I use this to advance, I suppose. My jumping off point for the talk today is a little line in David and Emily's paper. David alluded to this in his talk. As is typical with national polls, none of the three national polls offered respondents an option of self-identifying as libertarian. Everyone just assumes, well, either you're liberal or conservative, or maybe you're in between, but there's a single dimension, is what everybody assumes. And they ask the question, well, what happens if you do? What do you learn if you allow libertarians to distinguish themselves from liberals and conservatives? And as you'll see in the paper, if you read their paper, you find that there are big differences in their demographics. Libertarians are more educated, more male, less religious. You find big differences on social policy, as David just told you, but not on economic policy. That's the area of overlap. But my question is, okay, but what about personality? What kinds of people are they? Not just what do they believe, what are their personality traits? I ask this because personality in psychology, or personality in politics, I should say, is the hottest area in political psychology. Ever since George Lakoff's book in the late 90s, and then later on, twin studies showed that if you take identical twins separated at birth, and you know that one is conservative, and his identical twin raised elsewhere is much more likely than chance to be a conservative, or vice versa for liberal. Because your genes make your brain has certain traits, those traits make you just more responsive to liberal arguments, perhaps, or to conservative arguments. So your personality doesn't dictate your final politics, but it kind of nudges you in one direction or another. But all people talk about is liberal and conservative. Short answer to summarize all these books, conservatives are defective, they were beaten as children, they're afraid of death, and I forget what the other reasons are, but it's basically all their fault. Now, what about libertarians? Well, there's good reason to think that libertarians and conservatives are going to be very, very different sorts of people. As David referred to, Orrin Hatch survived a challenge and later said of those libertarian Tea Partiers, these people are not conservatives, they're not Republicans, they're radical libertarians, and I'm doggone offended by it. I despise these people. All right, this isn't just that they differ on social policy. This is they're different sorts of people, and he doesn't like these sorts of people. Now, I happen to run or co-run with my colleagues a website called yourmorals.org, where people can come, they can take, we've had about 60 or 70 studies up on the site at various times, and when people come, before they get to this page, they register. You give us a little bit of demographic information, and unlike most national surveys, we don't force you to say where you are in a 1 to 7 scale. We say, here's the 1 to 7 scale. Most people place themselves along it. But, and so the data I'll show you today is going to be grouping the people who chose very liberal, liberal, or slightly liberal. Those will always be in the blue bars that I'll show you. Slightly conservative, conservative, or very conservative. Those will be in the red bars that I'll show you. But for people who don't want to pick one of those, we let them say, don't know, not political, or libertarian, or even other. So we only want to put people into a box if they willingly put themselves into that box. And then we'll see how their personalities differ. The sample that I'll tell you about, this is not a representative sample, so the numbers that I tell you can't be taken as the number for this group in America, but the differences between our groups are robust. We've compared them to nationally representative samples. So for this sample, this is 130,000 people, most of whom are liberals. That's who comes to our website mostly. That's who does web research mostly. But we have a lot of libertarians. In our data, it's about 10 or 12%, so an oversample of libertarians at our site compared to nationally representative samples, and 20,000 conservatives. Our libertarians are overwhelmingly male. Now, even nationally, what is the ratio in your data of?
Something like 65%, yeah.
So about 2/3 of libertarians are male. In our sample, it's 4/5, so it's oversampling or overrepresented. So that's the data I'll be showing you. So here's the data. We had about 40 or 50 studies where we could compare liberals, conservatives, and libertarians. And to publish it, we had to just pick about 15 of them. And to publish that, we had to simplify it. We broke it up into 3 sets of studies, all around a common theme. Now, I know Ayn Rand does not speak for all libertarians, but she sure does speak a lot and says lots of quotable things. And so here's one thing she says about altruism. If any civilization is to survive, it is the morality of altruism that men have to reject. So do libertarians reject altruism? Well, on the left, altruism is most of morality, which would mean that libertarians reject morality. Our hypothesis was that libertarians will reject almost all the moral values, or at least they will endorse them less strongly than liberals or conservatives, except for liberty. Here's what we find. Our main instrument is called the Moral Foundations Questionnaire. We have a variety of questions about 5 moral foundations: care, fairness, loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And what you see here is that libertarians in the black bars in the middle of each triad score actually low on everything. So like conservatives, they are low on care and compassion. Will Wilkinson once said, libertarians, well, they're basically liberals who lack bleeding hearts. And there is some truth to that. So at least here on they're low on care, compassion, those sorts of issues, along with conservatives. As you see, the black and red bars are very similar there. They're low on fairness, but here fairness is more about equality. Later on, we changed it so that fairness is more about proportionality, and then things differ. But in this way, libertarians are like conservatives. However, when we look at these more socially conservative foundations of loyalty, authority, and sanctity, now libertarians are indistinguishable from liberals. They don't care a lot about patriotism, group loyalty, respect for authority, a sense of sanctity or purity, protecting the flag, all those sorts of social issues that David said there's a difference on. You see that here. So the bottom line is that libertarians can side with either side. They can look out at various issues and say, hey, we're just, or I should say, either side can claim them because there are areas of match, but they don't fit properly with either side of the one-dimensional spectrum. Now, after we did this research, we thought, and that was in part from reading David's work, his other writings and writings from Cato on libertarians and what libertarians stand for, we realized, well, liberty is a basic value that we didn't include in our original set. When we made up some items to tap conceptions of liberty, valuations of liberty, we found, we collected a lot of data on that, and then we did a factor analysis to figure out what are the different subtypes of liberty. We found 2 major subtypes, economic liberty and lifestyle liberty. Items are up there as representative items. And what we found when we ran these items on thousands and thousands of people are that libertarians are indeed high on both these kinds of liberty. They value lifestyle liberty more even than do liberals. That's here. So liberals and libertarians can side together on gay rights, fighting the drug war, things like that. Conservatives are the odd man out. But when it comes to any sort of economic liberty, suddenly liberals are almost not at the floor, but they're very, very low. They really don't think there are these major inviolable rights to economic liberty, whereas libertarians and conservatives do. And that, of course, is the area of overlap that David was talking about, David and Emily are talking about. So these are sort of moral attitudes. You could call them personality if you want, but now let's get more deeply into personality. Ayn Rand. Every aspect of Western culture needs a new code of ethics, or rational ethics, as a precondition of rebirth. Libertarians seem proud of the fact that they are rational, analytical, less swayed by emotion, and we find that that is indeed the case. The most important scale, the most revealing one, I think, in our whole paper, is it's a personality variable that comes from Simon Baron-Cohen, the empathizing, systemizing scale. He has a whole bunch of items that give you a score on, one trait is called systemizing, which is the drive to understand the variables in a system and how those variables govern the behavior of the system. So if you like to understand subway maps, spreadsheets, any sort of chess, any sort of complex system, if you enjoy doing that, you're high on systemizing. Empathizing is the drive to identify the emotions that another person is experiencing and to respond with an appropriate emotion. So there is a big sex difference here. Men are generally higher on systemizing, women are generally higher on empathizing. And what we find is that libertarians are, in a sense, the most masculine out there. And this is true even when we analyze only the men, separate all the men and women, just look at men. Libertarian men are the highest on systemizing of any of the three groups, and they are the lowest on empathizing. Same thing for women. In fact, libertarians are the only group whose systemizing scores in absolute terms, whose systemizing scores, we can't quite see it, are actually higher than their empathizing scores. And this reflects a lot of things happening. Many have pointed to the feminizing of the Democratic Party since the 70s. It's not just that it's gotten more female, it's that it's gotten more feminine. This might be part of the growing separation between liberals and libertarians in the last several decades. Okay. There are a whole bunch of other studies in the paper, but to summarize, I can just tell you like this. If it's a measure of emotion, libertarians are probably the lowest of the three groups. If it's a measure of reasoning, rationality, they're the highest. So need for cognition, we give some logic problems where if you go with your gut feelings on it, you'll get it wrong. But if you think carefully and analytically, you'll get it right. Libertarians score highest, conservatives lowest. Tolerance of ambiguity and openness, and all those traits, libertarians are the highest. On emotions, almost every emotion measure that we use, compassion, disgust sensitivity, gratitude, libertarians are the lowest. And again, this is within gender. So just looking at libertarian men or just looking at libertarian women compared to other men and women. There's one exception. There's only one emotion that we have measured on which libertarians are higher. It's one called reactance. Items on the scale are things such as, I find contradicting others stimulating. It makes me angry when another person is held up as a model for me to follow. And this is my favorite. When something is prohibited, I usually think that's exactly what I'm going to do. So libertarians do have emotional reactions when people infringe on their liberty or somehow manipulate them to go a certain way. They rear up and say, no, don't tell me to do that. Very, very different from social conservatives. Third, how do libertarians relate to others? If libertarians are more cerebral and less emotional, you might think that this will impact their relationships, and indeed it does. Ayn Rand says, to say I love you, one must first know how to say the I. She took a rather dim view of these sappy portrayals of romantic, passionate love. Oh, I live for you, I long for you. So we hypothesized that libertarians would be more individualistic and less connected to other people than either liberals or conservatives, and that's indeed what we find. The major measure of personality that is widely used is called the Big Five. It measures these 5 traits. Openness to experience. Do you like new ideas? Do you come out to hear intellectual talks? You're probably high on openness to experience. Libertarians and liberals are really, really high. This is why they encounter each other so often at cultural events. They like to go to the same sorts of things. Conservatives are low. But now let's look at the 3 traits that are really associated with sociability. So on the left, you see the data for extroversion. How much do you just like being with people? You're energized by being with people. Well, liberals and conservatives are identical to each other. Libertarians are low. They're more introverted. They're not as oriented towards socializing. The second set of bars is agreeableness. How nice, warm, friendly, agreeable. How easy is it to get along with you? Liberals and conservatives are equal. Libertarians are low. Third set of bars, conscientiousness. How much do you feel the pull of obligations because you need to do things for people? Something needs to be done. Here, conservatives are the highest. Libertarians are the lowest, but they're pretty close to liberals. So on this major measure of personality, the gist is libertarians are really curious, open-minded people, but they're not that focused on other people. They want to learn, but they're not that focused on getting along with others. One last scale I'll show you, and then I'll close up. This one was a little surprising to me. These are questions about how much do you have warm, tender feelings for for your romantic partner on the left, for your family, for your friends, or for just people in general. And what we find is that conservatives score the highest of the 3 groups on family. That's not surprising. They talk, nation and family. Liberals score the highest on generic other. Liberals claim to feel a lot of compassion and love for just general others. Actually, they claim to feel more love for general others than for their own family. That's kind of weird. But liberals are universalists. Liberals tend to be focused, they're universalists. Libertarians are low on every single one. Libertarians, by self-report at least, claim to love their parents less than do liberals and conservatives. So, in summary, libertarians value liberty more than either liberals or conservatives. Libertarians rely upon reason more and emotion less than either liberals or conservatives. They're more individualistic and less connected to other people than either liberals or conservatives. The implications, and this is my last slide, are that libertarians and conservatives are a very odd couple indeed. In our data, actually, libertarians are a little bit more similar to liberals than they are to conservatives. But they are uniting politically with conservatives nowadays in the Tea Party because they have a common enemy. They're united by a devotion to economic liberty and in particular, I think, an opposition to the welfare state for very different reasons, I believe. Libertarians hate the welfare state because it is constantly infringing on one person's liberty to give positive liberty or help to another group. Conservatives, I believe, hate the welfare state because they think it saps self-reliance, character, moral fiber, devotion to God, family, all those other things. So I think even their reason for hating the welfare state is different. But as the Arab proverb says, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So that's it. Thank you.